Thanks for waiting. Thanks for waiting through an entire long negotiation. Thanks for coming. Thanks for waiting. Thanks for waiting through a very long negotiating process that not only took 3 days at the end of this week, but 7 days prior to that, with more than a year and a half in New York and many other venues, as governments and civil society working closely with them try to negotiate, investigate, research, implement, consider, discuss, propose, and reject many opportunities and options for continuing and expanding the model of sustainable development that originated here almost exactly 20 years ago today in this room, in this building, in this country, where the first Earth Summit convened in 1992. This is a civil society press conference representing the 9 so-called major groups, the various sectors of civil society that were empowered by Agenda 21 in 1992 to represent and participate on behalf of the broad majorities of the public who were most directly affected by the issues involved with sustainable development. Those who both feel the impacts of the various crises that have been amassing and threatening the various populations of our planet and the various ecosystems in which we exist, and those who are necessary in order to implement the changes required to adjust the transition and the development paths of all of us in order to find a way, a common way, a collective way that societies, peoples, families, and countries can chart a course to a more safe, sustainable, healthy, and pleasant environment for all of us and our children and grandchildren. Those civil society sectors have been empowered in a unique way by Agenda 21 and by the UN in its process. They are not on par with governments. No one should ever make that confusion, and we don't make that confusion ourselves. But what they are here to do is to give a voice, to give policy recommendations, to share their expertise, and to add to the urgency of those government negotiators who are the proper members of the United Nations, and to impress upon them at every turn the necessity of taking action, and not just talking, the necessity and the actuality of the situations that people on the ground are experiencing. And most important and sometimes overlooked, because we're all addressed with the difficulties of the negotiation and the difficult realities on the ground, to inform and remind people of the actual opportunities and achievable real answers that are already there. In 20 and 40 long years of pioneering, organizations and individuals have come up with countless replicable, achievable, affordable, attractive solutions, both technological and policy-oriented, that can, if put together and implemented, can make this world a more livable, more satisfying, and healthier and safer place for all of us. We're going to try to address all of those issues, framed, of course, with reactions to the results on the ground here at Rio. We have an impressive number of speakers. We'll try to move quickly, and we'll try to address everything. First, on my right, Executive Director of Greenpeace International, Kumi Naidu, well known to those in this fora and in the sustainable development community, will address the results directly from the Congress. Kumi.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody. When history looks back on what happened here in the last week, it will probably be remembered as a missed historic opportunity. Probably people will say this was not Rio+20, but Rio-20. Or perhaps they will say it was greenwash +20. Our leaders in the negotiations, I believe, if you are brutally honest, have failed us. They have not delivered the specific actions that are necessary, with specific deadlines, with specific targets, with the resources to back it. What we have is, in fact, vague commitments with lots of wiggle-out language, which allows most governments to actually walk away from implementing the top-level language that has actually been used here. We say this because if you look back at history, even when we have had specific targets and specific deadlines and so on, often governments have failed to deliver. In this context, when we don't have it, we would be extremely unwise to actually make a judgment call that in fact there's any room for optimism moving forward. In terms of process, I think it is kind of extraordinary that when our heads of state arrived here over the last 3 days, they did not even spend 1 hour negotiating amongst themselves. They abdicated the responsibility to senior civil servants, diplomats, and in some cases ministers. And I think the absence of doing that is a tragedy and an abdication of responsibility, and largely we can say that heads of state used this as a photo opportunity and to make announcements of, in some cases, quite good projects, but we didn't need a big global UN conference to actually do that. They could have made those comments back in the capitals. To round up, I would say that our leaders appear to be suffering from a very bad dose of cognitive dissonance, where all the facts are on the table about how serious the situation is, and they do not respond with the urgency and the ambition that the situation calls for. With climate change alone, the science is clear that we need to get emissions to peak by 2015, and we don't stand a chance to do that based on a business as usual approach. The fact that we have 1 billion people in the world that will go hungry tonight is a crisis. It's an immorality that we cannot afford to close our eyes to, and it seems that this was not given sufficient attention. And the one issue that I would like to say, which is why many people in the women's movement, for example, are talking about Rio+20, is the scandalous reality of a male-dominated gathering deciding to decide for women what they can do with their bodies by the position that they've taken on women's reproductive rights. To conclude, on the way forward, I think we as civil society will be needing to also challenge ourselves about whether, in fact, if we are saying to governments and business that it cannot be business as usual, we should also now be telling ourselves it cannot be activism as usual. And what might that mean? Amongst other things, I think we need to build greater and maximum unity amongst ourselves. We have to be looking at how we can focus much more on the larger number of areas where we agree, and how we can work and fight and push together on those areas, while respectfully agreeing to disagree on the minor amount of areas where we might have a difference. So we've got to take the struggle back to the boardrooms and back to the capitals, and to end on the question of why we think that we have had this kind of outcome. There will be some who want to blame the UN, there will be some who want to blame Brazil in terms of its facilitation of this meeting, but I think for Greenpeace and many of our allies, we would place the blame solely and primarily on the big polluting corporations that actually own various governments and actually determine the positions that governments actually take at this at an event like Rio+20. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jimmy. No applause, please. No applause, please. This is a press conference, not an NGO. Thanks. Speaking next is Antonio Tujan Jr. of IVON International. It's a Philippine-based NGO which coordinates the NGO clusters on rights and equity at G20. He was one of 3 NGO representatives who was selected to speak at the Rio+20 high-level roundtables. His focus is on achieving more aid and better aid for developing countries in general.
Thank you, Michael. The crisis is already upon us. The climate crisis will soon become irreversible. But we do have the capacity to act and to put money to make this real. But why is it that here at Rio, there is a lot of de-powering and people in our governments apparently are not ready to act? Instead of blooming, elaborating sustainable development in the face of crisis, what they have instead is a corporate finance or corporate-driven green growth agenda. According to a study of Reality of Aid, despite the economic crisis, there is actually enough money in the OECD countries, the northern countries, the rich countries, to live up to their commitments of 0.7% of GDP for their aid. There is enough money to contribute to climate finance. But because there is a crisis, the debate whether to put that money to help save the environment, to help prevent climate crisis, to help the poor countries in the world, is now being overtaken by corporations who say that that money is better off used to catalyze investment. And that's the way that this conference has moved. Instead, of pushing for genuine sustainable development 20 years after Rio, we now have what we think is a corporate agenda that has derailed, or is derailed, what would have been a great conference. The outcome document is a compromise that does not do us all proud. But it could have been worse. We had to fight 6 months ago because the largest G7 economies in the world, 4 of the 7, wanted to take out all references to human rights, wanted to take out references to the rights to development, and to delete social sustainability from the Sustainable Development Agenda, and replace it, of course, with a green growth agenda. Many of the rights are back, but unbelievably, under the context of population management, we are not able to address that with women's sexual and reproductive rights. That is unacceptable. Instead, we now have the IMF and the World Bank waiving the green growth conditionality, treating G7 countries as seem like school children in the negotiations, in their push for green conditionalities that would put environmental services as our response, that would put private sector-led technology rather than developing the capacity of governments to address the problems in our poor countries. That we had to defend these rights in Rio, that we had to defend Agenda 21 in Rio 20 years after, is unbelievable. We believe that this onslaught of the corporate agenda makes Rio unacceptable. We cannot be proud of this document. We don't want to be a party to this outcome.
Thank you, Tony. To increase and continue the variety of perspectives, and not all happy ones, we're now going to hear from a representative of youth. Ivana Savage is one of the organizing partners for the sector that's called Children and Youth as a major group, represents the Child Rights Center in Belgrade. She works closely and has been for more than 2 years with the UN process, and before that with organizations in her own part of the world. Ivana.
Good day, everyone. So I'm one of the organizing partners in the major group for children and youth that Agenda 21 recognized as one of the major group is one of the partners of governments in achieving sustainable development. 20 years after, I think we cannot talk about partnership in the true sense of the word, because yes, we indeed had participation of civil society, but we can discuss how the participation was organized. One of the highlights of this process was contribution to the outcome document and submissions from organizations all around the world. However, those, even though inputs were submitted and also reflected in the first zero draft of the outcome document, governments actually did not take it into account. We as a major group, our major group for children and youth are not happy with the current document because it doesn't reflect our views, and also doesn't reflect the integrated approach to sustainable development, where actually those 3 pillars should be integrated. It was also highlighted as one of the major issues in implementation of sustainable development. Furthermore, there is no references to planetary boundaries. For example, even though green jobs are in the text, there is no reference to planetary boundaries, so it's also kind of hard to implement it. Also, when it comes to reform of institutions and also creating a space where actually change can happen on the international level, and that will also support changes at the national level, there is actually no change, and there is actually a reflection of lack of commitment and lack of willingness to create a space where actually all stakeholders could be represented there and actually create solutions for global problems and also for the national problems. Additionally, what was already mentioned, human rights is very big reference into human rights. Related to human rights is also, within the context of institutional framework, is not finding the outcome document ombudsperson for the future generation that actually would represent a very huge innovation in sustainable development. And we also supported integrated approach to sustainable development, but it's just delayed until further. And what can be also said in terms of participation of civil society, we also had dialogues that also present a hope. That can be also seen as a hope of participation of civil society in environmental processes. Overall, even though we are not happy overall with the document, we will continue working and also mobilizing, especially on a national level, to create the change and also push for the changes so that it can also be reflected at the international level. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. To point the way forward and try to help us all figure out what happens next, our next speaker will try to analyze the implications of the summit agreements and lack thereof, and what various organizations, individuals, and governments must now do. Stephen Hale is Deputy Advocacy and Campaigns Director of Oxfam International. Before that, he had policy roles in the UK government, with the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and Director of the Green Alliance, an independent charity and think tank working on environmental policy in the UK. Stephen.
Thank you. As Kumi just said to me, no pressure there. You just need to tell us what on earth to do next. For us, Rio+20 will go down as a host summit. Leaders came, they talked, and they failed to act. It has been a profound abdication of responsibility. We elect our leaders to lead, and they've shown at this conference that they're paralysed by inertia, they're often in hoc to vested interests, and they're unable to join the dots. I strongly associate myself with the previous speakers. There are profoundly connected crises in our world today, of environment, of equity, and of economy. And our governments have to rise up and see those connections. Our work on food is deeply and intimately connected to Greenpeace's work on climate. We cannot solve these crises without seeing the connections between us. But I think there were perhaps three rays of hope from our perspective coming out of this city. The first was around the creation of the process for a new set of sustainable development goals. It was a painful birth, but it gives us a vision, a possibility of creating an ambitious set of goals which truly unify the environmental and social agendas, and which truly require not just developing countries, but developed countries too, to set out their goals and their responsibilities. And so that creates a potential vehicle. There was an announcement last night by the UN Secretary General on a zero hunger challenge. That, outside the formal process, contains a lot of ambition which we didn't see in the formal outcome. We fought for many commitments to be made in the text. We fought for a long time over the months in the run-up to this summit for strong commitments on tackling the food crisis. None of that came through the official process, but in what Ban Ki-moon set out last night, we do potentially have a vehicle. But I think the real ray of hope, the real sunshine in the city, and I'd note, by the way, that the sun hasn't actually shone since Tuesday night. The real sunshine in this city comes from the other side of the city. It comes from the People's Summit. It comes from a place where we have a movement which is coming together to set out the future we want. Power is not given. Change does not fall from the sky. Power is acquired. And Oxfam is proud to support and to participate and to work alongside organisations in that process and in this one here and those on the panel today. Because we recognise that as we look forward, the front line of struggle so often in many of these areas is at the community level, is at the national level, whatever the issue that you may be focusing on. And we're all, as I said, coming out of this recognising the connections, profound connections that we need to strengthen between our interests. And that national level, that community level will remain the key site of struggle, I think. But what we also have to do is to make clear that there are global crises and they require global solutions. And we as global civil society will not stand back, will not leave that space. We will identify where it is and how it is that we can work together at a multilateral level, identify where those spaces are where change truly can come. We saw change coming today in Europe at a meeting of European leaders on the financial transaction tax, where they finally made a commitment to end what has been an important but ultimately unsuccessful conversation across 27 member states, and make a commitment now that 9 European countries will go forward with a financial transaction tax which has such enormous support among civil society and among the general public. We see in our work on food a space at the World Committee on Food Security, a legitimate space for all governments where real commitments are being made on how we can prevent land graft in other areas. And again, that is somewhere where Oxfam and many, many other organisations can work together to drive the global change we need. And then finally, as we look ahead to the process that was born here, to the potential for a new set of sustainable development goals, we see a process that could create opportunities for us to mobilise. Whether we're workers, whether we're working on human rights, whether we're the women's movement, whether it's Oxfam with our traditional interest on poverty, there is a potential there to create something in different ways, connecting in different ways, working in different ways, but demanding together that the world does something which it did not do in Rio, that it makes clear and ambitious commitments, that it recognises that environment and development and economy cannot be separated, and it makes commitments to goals and to the transformation we need. So I think that is the ray of hope, and that is the challenge ahead for all of us. Thank you.
It would only be fair to talk about some of the other activities that have taken place around this summit. As Stephen just mentioned, there was a large, sprawling, colorful, outside NGO forum downtown, which in some ways created much more energy than the summit. But there were also other areas. More than 100 or several hundred business leaders gathered from nearby to discuss what was initially being referred to as the green economy, which was originally framed as a key and critical part of this summit. The goal of the green economy, which we will not recapitulate in detail here, was an attempt to bring in the main and major business actors and other sectors of the economy and try to integrate them into the necessary transitions that are needed to build a path towards sustainable development. Those corporations came in a significant way, often with interesting ideas, often with interesting records of their own. While there are decidedly mixed viewpoints on the entire strategy and concerns, many of which you've heard expressed here, there's another side to that story. And we will now hear from a business representative who's been intimately involved in those processes for a number of years. Martina Bianchini is chair of the International Chamber of Commerce Green Economy Task Force. She's also vice president for EU government relations and public policy for Dow Chemical. She's been with us in New York. She's been with us in the negotiating process. She has a wide variety of and range of experience, and she will inform us on that side of the story as well. Martina.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you your business perspective. And so far we had civil society perspective, but we heard things that we can all agree with. We heard there is a necessity to take action. We heard that we have the capacity to act. And we heard that there are connected crises and that we have to see the connections and that we need to look at the profound connections and understand their interdependencies. We also heard that there needs to be a clear and ambitious commitment. And I would like to offer the perspective from business and industry. We welcome the outcome document of the Rio+20 draft. We welcome the outcome document. Why? First of all, we applaud the confirmation of multilateral approaches. Businesses organized in value chains, economies, the many multiple economies around the world are interconnected, and they do require multilateral approaches. So this summit has actually confirmed that. And also, the summit has confirmed and recognized, that business actually plays a vital role in achieving and implementing sustainable development as well as poverty eradication. We would like to thank the government of Brazil for hosting us in this setting, and we'd also like to thank the government of Mexico for bringing the results from the G20 back to here to interlink some of these common and collective challenges that we have. When we look at the challenges from a business opportunity, they are enormous. Whilst a lot has been done, In business, we have worked on this for the last 15 months, and we developed a global roadmap for green economy. The economy, when we talk economy, at the core of the economy is business. So the private sector is a direct stakeholder in this process. And we started grappling the concept of green economy. We had to demystify it. And we had to identify the conditions that need to be in place. Because each one of us, whether you're government, civil society, or business, primarily we act in our own sphere of influence. So we identified 10 conditions that need to be worked on simultaneously. Bottom up, that's what's in our circle of control, what we can work on. But at the same time, top down, where governments need to address macro-political and systemic challenges. And we summarize these in what's called the Green Economy Roadmap. There's some more copies out there, and we encourage all of you to have a look at that, because it doesn't tell you exactly how to do it. We don't know how to do it, but it tells you the conditions that we need to work on, all of us. And the roadmap outlines conditions that we need to take intra-industry, as well as recommendations for collaborative action. So the challenge is to scale up the best practices that are out there. We heard over the last couple of days that there's many good examples, many best practices for innovative partnerships in place in business. We have CEOs of multinational companies here, and we have more than 800 people at the business day. But we recognize that this is not enough. And whilst we can work on our own level, what we can do at company level, we can start working at sectorial level, but the need now is to work at the cross-sector level into the value chains, and the need is to engage with other stakeholders. So business is about doing. We're about innovating. We're about practitioners. The green growth concept is appealing to many CEOs in the business side because they like to find solutions to the global megatrends, to the challenges, and they look at technology as well as new business models. So we need to work on scaling up through collaboration, through partnership, through innovative means to engage governments and stakeholders.
Thank you, Martina. And I just have to add that the fact that there was such an interest on the part of business in being involved, the fact that the initiation was taking place, is in some ways, I think, reflective of the frustration of this summit, that ways weren't found to engage more deeply and more effectively. Clearly, it's a sector that needs to be engaged, as well as all the other sectors moving forward. The fact that the political momentum was not achieved to bring that sector in a way that the other sectors here can engage and possibly to bridge some of those deep and unfortunate chasms of distrust is unfortunate. I would suggest that the lack of political involvement by certain heads of state contributed to that lack of political will and political momentum, and is one of the casualties of the summit, and an unfortunate one. Our final speaker for now, at least, because we may have more on the way, is someone who's also been around the sustainable development movement for many years, both domestically and internationally. Tom Goldtooth is Executive Director of the Indigenous Environmental Network, a Native American representative from Minnesota in the U.S., whose network is international. He's worked heavily on chemical issues, both on the media side and in terms of direct organizing for economic and environmental justice. He's been involved for more than 30 years and brings with him a wealth of both personal experience, professional experience, and a moral voice as well. Tom.
Thank you. I just returned from the final day of the Karaoke 2, which is about 20 minutes from here, and it's out in the area where many grassroots people from the Amazon and throughout the world gathered for the past week. We counted about 470 indigenous peoples who came together. Many of them may be people that you work with, but many may not be people that you know. These are the grassroots people who are living on that very final thread of survival. And they came together to give critical analysis to the situation that they face, the reality that they face every day around these terminologies that we use about sustainable development, green economy, and about making a better future and a better world possible. They told us to speak out and speak out loud, that reestablishes and reaffirms their responsibility that they took to speak for the protection of the sacredness of Mother Earth and the enhancement and well-being of the environment, the ecosystem, and all of humanity. They said that since Rio 1992, that as indigenous peoples, both here in Brazil as well as throughout the world, that they see that colonization has become the very basis of the globalization of trade and the dominant capitalist global economy. The exploitation and blunder of the world's ecosystem and biodiversity, as well as a violation of the inherent rights of indigenous peoples that depend on them, have intensified. They have not gone away. The situation is not better. The 20 years that have gone by have caused the death of many of our indigenous peoples. They just lost another indigenous leader in this region, and all he was doing was speaking up for his rights. They said that as indigenous peoples, that from all regions of the world, that we stand in defense of Mother Earth from the aggression of unsustainable development and the over-exploitation of our natural resources by mining, logging, metal dams, dams like Belamonte, exploitation and extraction of oil, petroleum, fossil fuels. They mentioned about the forest suffering from the use of timber, the production of agrofuels, biomass, plantations, and other imposition of false solutions to climate change and unsustainable damaging development. As indigenous peoples, we stand united. There were 3 gatherings of indigenous peoples here at Rio+20. The Carioca, which brought our people together from the grassroots, and the International Indigenous Peoples Conference on Sustainable Development and Self-Determination that brought approximately 150 indigenous peoples together, many of them involved in an insight strategy working in the halls of the United Nations. And also there was the regional Coabi and Quaker, our indigenous peoples in the Amazon, all who are saying and expressing the issue that I'm talking about. The green economy is nothing more than capitalism of nature. Green economy is nothing but corporations, extractive industries, and the governments that cash in on creation by privatizing, commodifying, and selling off the sacred in all forms of life and the sky, including the air we breathe, the water we drink, and all of the genes, plants, traditional seeds, trees, animals, fish, biological and cultural diversity, ecosystems, and even our traditional knowledge is up for sale. This makes life on Mother Earth a very serious matter. Mother Earth is the source of life which needs to be protected, not a resource to be exploited and commodified as a natural capital. There is an inseparable relationship between humans and the earth, inherent to indigenous peoples, and it must be respected, not only for the sake of our people, but the sake for your people and all people of the world. We urge, this is the message that indigenous peoples have said, we urge all humanity to join with us in transforming the social structures, institutions, and power relations that underpin our deprivation, oppression, and exploitation. Imperialist globalization exploits all that sustains life and damages the earth. We need to fundamentally reorient production and consumption based on human needs rather than for the boundless accumulation of profit for a few. These are words that were mentioned, they were talked about, they were prayed, and 3 of the medicine people shamans of the Amazon blessed this document called the Carioca 2 Declaration, and it's available online. They said that as people, we reaffirm our rights to self-determination and to own, control, and manage our traditional lands and territories. One thing that I observed in participating in these circles of indigenous peoples here in Rio, in the inside and outside venues, is that we reaffirm our commitment to unite as indigenous peoples and to build a strong solidarity and partnership amongst ourselves. We made local commitments to be not only advocates but to resist. We will fight, we will resist from the north to the south, to the east to the west. We are from the ice cultures of the Arctic areas, we are from the Pacific Islands, we are from India, the Adivasis, we are from Africa, and we are from the Latin America, Western hemispheres. So this is the voice for the world, is that we are not going away as indigenous peoples. We are the consciousness of who you are. We are the land. The world leaders have lost their faith and identification with their relationship to the sacredness of Mother Earth. And the final comment I have is that we invite all of civil society to protect and promote our rights and worldview and respect natural law, harmony with nature, and respect the rights of Mother Earth. We are asking for the dignity of all people as well, and the dignity of our Mother Earth. In this context, we call for the inclusion of culture as a fourth pillar of sustainable development. Join us in that campaign. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. We have time for questions, and we'll have time for all questions. Before we do, let me just say, this